I think we're going to start our proceedings now. This is the second half of our conference on the right to research. I don't think I need any introduction after making so much noise in the first half. For anyone who is new and doesn't know me, I'm Ben Cashton, TV producer and filmmaker in Johannesburg, formerly an economic advisor in the Mandela presidency, now doing a lot of work on copyright reform and access to knowledge. We have two speakers who are going to address us to open the conference in CapeTown. I hope folks on Zoom can hear everything fine with our Zoom call. Great. Excellent. The first one is, I think, do I have the order right? Is it Judy Hermans, I think, who's going to speak first? I don't see Tobias. Yeah. Oh, there you are. Yeah. I don't know what the order is on the program, but oh, it was you first. Okay, so we'll stick to the order because anyway we're at the University of CapeTown and in the law faculty, where Professor Tobias Schonwetter is a professor of law teaching in the IP unit, where he's the head, and also the Intaka Law Center, looking at issues of intellectual property in society and information policy and so on. So Tobias has many hats indeed. Thank you very much, Tobias.
Good morning again. So welcome to CapeTown. Welcome to the University of CapeTown. Welcome to the Intellectual Property Unit here in the Law Faculty. I cannot begin to tell you how thrilled I am to co-host this event here today, for a variety of reasons, really. Not only are we obviously dealing with issues that are highly topical at the moment. I can't wait to hear from our speakers more about what they have to say, and I'm going to touch on that in a little bit in my opening remarks here. But quite honest, it's also such a wonderful excuse to meet again so many exciting, well-established, wonderful, respected scholars, subject matter experts, and many of which really have become, over the years, trusted collaborators and friends. So it's really good to see you, and I think there really is hardly a better way of kicking off a year. And we are still early in the year. It's only January, so it's a wonderful way of kicking off, really. But what we do here today is obviously, as Ben already mentioned, a continuation of the conversations that started earlier this week in Pretoria. And I heard from those who attended, and I wasn't unfortunately able to attend, but I heard very good things about the proceedings here, and I hope that in some way we can replicate that and take this further, really. The title for all this week's proceedings, as you know from the program, is A Right to Research in Africa, a week of debates on copyright and access to knowledge. Now, as I'm sure most of you know, this is exciting times for intellectual property law and policy making on the African continent. Several countries on the continent currently engage in some form of reform, whether it's the Copyright Act, the patent laws, whether they are in the process of drafting policies for their countries and the like. But also for the whole continent, the AFCFTA, of course, is supposed to have a protocol on intellectual property, and I think this is now really within reach. I have no more news on that most of you in the room, so I can't even spill the beans on that, but I do believe that we might be hearing something again about this as soon as next month again, in February. Now, these processes, and in particular this never-ending copyright revision process here in South Africa, will really provide the bedrock for our proceedings here today. We have planned for 3 sessions, as you know from the program. I give you an abbreviated version of those now. The first one is Digitising Heritage. The second one is Access to Knowledge in Africa, Health, Culture, and Artificial Intelligence. And then the last one with the longest name is Strengthening the Voice of Africa and the Global South, New Directions in WIPO, AFCFTA, and Copyright in Africa. Now, on the face of it, IP reform processes are very much about responding to all these unprecedented changes in technology that we have all been subjected to. And some of which, quite frankly, like artificial intelligence, really call into question some of the very concepts that intellectual property law and policies are based on, like authorship, ownership, inventorship, and the like. But as if this is not enough, I think we also need to do 3 other important things right now. First one, we need to really start revisiting some of these main philosophical underpinnings for intellectual property law. Second, we need to also start future-proofing our laws. And with that, I mean that we are not always just try to play catch-up with new technologies, but that we can also respond to new technologies that are yet unforeseen. And thirdly, and sorry, there's a loaded term coming now for especially those who work in this country, we have to continue decolonize our intellectual property laws and policy frameworks so that they better respond to our realities and to our context here in Africa and in South Africa. I would say that especially that last aspect that I just mentioned is the one that has created much of the tension that we have been witnessing over the years in the copyright reform processes here in South Africa. And this is why. Closer look at our copyright amendment bill reveals that quite some emphasis was obviously put by the drafters on copyright exceptions and limitations. Now, for me, it's no surprise that those that this does not resonate well with those who make a living or whose job it is to generate revenue from IP protection and enforcement proceedings. But it does make a lot of sense to put this emphasis on copyright exceptions and limitations, really, if you dig a little bit deeper. And once you acknowledge that the term copyright exceptions and limitations is, in a way, actually a misnomer. These are not provisions that really are primarily designed to limit the rights of intellectual property right owners. But instead, they are manifestations of important rights, including human rights, and in fact, of critical development objectives. These provisions seek to improve education. They seek to improve innovation, progress of science, and the participation in and benefiting from these progresses in these areas, for example, in the healthcare sector. They also aim to counter some of the disadvantages that monopolistic systems do typically cause, of which intellectual property law is one. And facilitating research, then, is critical to achieve these objectives, especially in the digital environment. As a research-led university here at the University of Cape Town, we know this. And it is against this background that we need to explore how a right to research can be incorporated better into our IP frameworks, in particular, but not exclusively, into our copyright laws and policies. Today's discussion will hopefully take us one step closer to this goal. We won't solve it completely, for sure. But what I'm looking forward to is to continue looking at this issue from an African perspective. This is why we have that here. And I'm very much looking forward to today's proceedings, to listen to all the speakers. And while I'm done with my substantive remarks, I want to not conclude before I say thank you to all of those who have helped to pull off this event on the ground here in Cape Town, those who have helped in Johannesburg, and then, of course, all our co-hosts, University of Pretoria, PIDGIP at American University's Washington College of Law, South Center, CIPIT at Strathmore University in Kenya, Eiffel, Maskane, and the Wikimedia Foundation. And I hope I haven't forgotten anything. Of course, also Black Stripe Foundation and Acadia. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's begin, and let's also have a bit of fun. It's Cape Town after all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tobias. And without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome here Ms. Judy Hermans, Member of Parliament in South Africa, who has in recent months and years been responsible in the Trade, Industry and Competition Portfolio Committee as the latest chairperson of that committee for steering various pieces of legislation, most relevant to us, the Copyright Amendment Bill in its passage through Parliament. We are not allowed to blame Judy for any of the previous mishaps or adventures that the bill has gone through because she arrived in the process in the last year or two. And previously, the very able Joan Fubbs, a veteran of the ANC and government, was doing the job. But there have been lots of different people in the process. But Judy, who's here comes from Cape Town originally and is a native here, has worked tirelessly to see the legislation continue and pass through Parliament. So welcome, Judy.
Thank you very much, Ben and Tobias. You are in Cape Town, also known as Slaapstad, which means we are the laid-back sister to our Johannesburg city. So welcome to Cape Town. My task is very small here today. I just want to bring you a word of welcome to the University of Cape Town. This is the city of our democratic parliament. On the 8th of May 2019, the people of South Africa cast their votes in South Africa's 6th non-racial democratic election to determine which political parties will represent them in Parliament and in the provincial legislatures. This important election coincided with the 25th anniversary of our constitutional democracy. As the legislative authority of our democratic parliament, of our republic, Parliament must ensure that there is government by the people under the Constitution. The National Assembly must ensure this by choosing a president, providing a national forum for public consideration of issues, by passing legislation, and by checking and evaluating executive actions of government. The National Council of Provinces, which is our other House of Parliament, ensures that provincial interests are taken into account in the national sphere of government. It does this mainly by participating in the national legislative process and by providing a national forum for public consideration of issues affecting the provinces. I have the privilege, as Ben has mentioned, of serving in Parliament as the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Trade, Industry and Competition. Our legislative work ranges from trade and investment to industrial development, the promotion of entrepreneurship and innovation, as well as Black economic empowerment. Research and development plays a critical role in enabling the economic and social development of Africa. However, copyright legislation can either inhibit or facilitate the pace at which research and development unfolds. In the current discourse related to South Africa's copyright regime or legislation, government has been tasked to find an appropriate balance between the incentive for and ability of copyright owners to develop new works and enabling users to have fair access to these works for the advancement of society. A very important area of focus for us is ensuring that we have the right approach to intellectual property and access to knowledge. As you know, protection of IP can provide an important incentive to invent, create, and express ourselves by ensuring that we have the opportunity to exploit fruits of our creativity as part of our livelihoods. At the same time, according to Article 6.1 of our Bill of Rights, Everyone in South Africa has the right to freedom of expression, which includes freedom to receive or impart information or ideas, freedom of artistic creativity, and academic freedom, and freedom of scientific research. Article 29 sets out our right to education, both basic education and further education, and finally, Article 9 of our Bill of Rights outlaws discrimination on the grounds of race, gender, ethnic or social origin, sexual orientation, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, language, and birth, amongst others. In a country with deep inequality, these rights will only be realized if we are proactive in increasing access to education, research, knowledge, and the means to participate actively and fully in economic activity. This push for equality and inclusivity, as required by our Constitution, is one of the main drivers of our work on copyright reform. Another important reason for the present reforms is the situation faced by our creators. Many face an extremely difficult existence with their work being used without proper recognition and adequate remuneration. The life of an African musician, artist, actor, creator is often one of poverty. In this context, the Copyright Amendment Bill passed by the National Assembly aims to make some important steps forward. It is built on two central pillars: protecting the livelihoods of creators and increasing access for our whole society. In other words, fair royalties and fair use. Our president recognized the importance of the bill in September last year when he said, I quote, "A new copyright amendment bill passed by the National Assembly at the beginning of this Heritage Month will go a long way in protecting our artists and towards addressing their concerns about the collection and distribution of royalties," close quote. Introducing these important reforms in South Africa has been a long journey. It has generated opposition and controversy. It has been opposed by many with vested interest in the status quo. But our parliament reaffirmed its commitment to the reforms by passing an amended and improved version of the legislation on the 1st of September last year. Within the Copyright Amendment Bill, we introduced the principle of exceptions, as mentioned by Prof. Tobias, and limitations to copyright, just as many other countries are doing in Africa and across the world. A right to research falls squarely within those exceptions and limitations. I'm very happy to see that you are discussing pressing issues facing Africa at your conference, and from health to climate change to African languages to the needs of the disabled and the visually impaired. I see that you are also discussing the use of advanced computational methods in conducting research on large amounts of data in order to find solutions to these challenging problems. One of the examples of fair use that should be noted from Section 12A of the bill is the preservation of and access to collections of libraries, archives, and museums. Furthermore, Section 19C5 provides for the backup or preservation of copyright-protected works in these collections. This would allow for the digitization of heritage materials. Unless African researchers can use cutting-edge methods to develop African solutions to our problems, drawing on the best scholarship and data from all over the world, we will be left behind in our responses. That is why we specifically list research, scholarship, teaching, and education as examples of fair use of copyrighted materials in our forthcoming legislation. Of course, fair use is balanced by a number of tests to ensure that the rights of creators are protected. If knowledge is behind paywalls separating the global north from the global south, we will never meet our objectives of inclusive growth and dignity for all. When a huge multinational corporation have a monopoly on publishing and distribution of distributing works of scholarship, textbooks, or even artistic and cultural works, and they choose to set the prices out of our reach, we all lose out. Future generations of creators and researchers also need to access art, culture, and scholarship. Knowledge is a cyclical process where we all stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before. Preservation of our heritage is also vitally important, and we are pleased to see this issue on your agenda, along with references to traditional and indigenous knowledge. South-South cooperation is vital in our work on increasing access to knowledge and creating a fairer global economy. So we are very pleased to see cutting-edge researchers from East, West, and South Africa at this conference. We are also very honored to be in the presence of senior copyright officials from the governments of Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. We encourage you in your copyright reform efforts, and we hope to learn from each other. We applaud the international experts who are participating in this conference from the USA, Canada, Brazil, and Europe. Your support and advice is appreciated. And last but not least, we are excited to see some of the brightest young minds and top scholars from South Africa here today. And this week from UCT, the University of Pretoria, and the SA Medical Research Council, amongst others. We are also happy to see top artists and musicians participating. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on how the policy on copyright and intellectual property might best support the right to research that the people of this country and continent need to survive, thrive, and prosper. Our legislation is currently in the National Council of Provinces, where it will undergo further input and deliberation, and we urge you to be part of the public consultation process so that the bill can be strengthened and make its way into law. We wish you all the best in your important discussions and deliberations this week. I thank you all.
Thank you very much. I'm just returning to the microphone for two logistical comments here, which I didn't do when I was speaking. The first one is that I just checked, and I think we are on load shedding at the moment. So we are obviously continuing on a generator at the moment, but especially for those of us who participate from afar, when the electricity comes back, we will lose electricity in this venue for 15 seconds, hopefully only. The generator will kick in, but will take quite a bit longer for our network to restart, about 10, 15, 20 minutes for it to be back on. So please don't leave us completely. Just give us a bit of time if you have to reconnect. We will still be here. It will just be difficult for some time. And then the second related issue, I didn't also mention that for those of you who need a voucher to connect to our Wi-Fi, these vouchers can be obtained at the registration desk. We only have 100, but it should be sufficient. But if you're one of those who don't really need them, don't take one. For example, if you're from an institution that also uses EduRoam and you can connect to UCT's network anyways without these vouchers, please make use of that. If you have tons of data left still at the end of the month here in South Africa, please use your own data so that someone else from perhaps overseas can use these vouchers instead. These are just two additional logistic remarks. Ben, over to you.
I think without further ado, we should continue with our first panel, which is about preservation and digitising our heritage. And I want to welcome Professor Dick Kawooya from the School of Information Science at the University of South Carolina to take over the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, and Tobias, the IP unit, University of Cape Town Law School, and our local hosts here in South Africa. As Ben has mentioned, my name is Dick Kawooya. I'm an associate professor in the School of Information Science at the University of South Carolina in the US. But as my students usually do, you usually want to know where the name and the accent is from. I don't make it easy for them. So I tell them I am from the Pearl of Africa. Then the next question is, where is the Pearl of Africa? So I'm not going to make that easy for those of you in the room. So I'm happy to be here, but I suspect my Director General will not be happy if I don't mention I'm from Uganda, beautiful country in East Africa. So, so excited to be here. For me, this is a homecoming. We've been doing work on issues of copyright and access to information for many years. There are so many colleagues, partners in the room that we've been working with, dating back to around 2003. So we could, in one way or another, say this is 20 years of copyright and access research and advocacy. So this is a good moment to take stock of what we've done and what remains to be done. This is the first of the session in the second leg of a week-long conversation on the issues of rights, the right to research, which I think is a fancy way to say access to knowledge. You know, lawyers like to come up with new terms, but we've been talking about access to knowledge for a long time, and I think this issue is about copyright and access to information. Over the years, much has changed, but also much remains the same. I can think of a country that is still grappling with copyright reform. In the last 20 years, we've been talking about this when we started this work. So hopefully this week and the next few weeks or months will be motivation for this country to take the necessary steps and make sure that the national copyright laws in that country are updated. We have a distinguished panel this morning that is going to talk about specifically the issue of digital preservation and how copyright can help facilitate preservation by information institutions of mostly African cultural heritage. In the last few years, we've seen devastating events that have wiped out entire collections of important resources that are irreplaceable. We are talking about, for instance, fires here at the University of Cape Town, which most of us in this room heard about or read about. Events in France, Brazil, and so many other man-made and natural disasters. So given where we are as a society with cut-edging technology, these events should not catch us unaware. We have the tools and the resources and the technology and the expertise to preserve our heritage. The question is, why are we not doing it? So this panel of experts is going to help us to understand what they are doing to solve these issues, these problems, but also help us to understand ways in which some of the legal barriers that we are talking about are making it difficult, or in some cases impossible, to address these problems. It is my honor to invite our panelists, so please, if you can make your way down to these chairs here. This is not necessarily the best setting. Usually, I like to be able to move around my classroom, but this is what we have. So please, if you can make your way down here. I will begin off by introducing the panel. Then we'll have a series of questions for each panelist. This is an informal conversational approach. We are not doing formal presentations. We will invite questions at the end of each round of responses. But if you have burning questions, you are welcome to ask those after each panelist. And then we'll see how to proceed. In your program, obviously, you have 5 panelists, but you have to hear 4 who are seated here. The reason is because one of our panelists, Miss Nikki Crowster, is unable to be with us for personal reasons. She has requested my dear friend of 20 years, Denise Nicholson, to step in and present on her behalf. But let me take this opportunity to introduce the panel, starting with Miss Mutanu Kyany'a, who is the Programs and Outreach Coordinator at the African Digital Heritage in Kenya, an organization that works at the intersection of cultural heritage and technology. She is a digital society scholar working with the African communities to identify how they can use technology to protect, preserve, and promote their cultural heritage. With a background in computer science and a specialization in digital cultures, she consults for a variety of national and international organizations. Next is Nikki, who is not able to be with us. Oh, Doug. Please, calm down. Sorry, I forgot about Doug. Please, yeah. Doug is everywhere, so it's easy to overlook him. Nick is, Crowster is the UCT's Libraries Director of Information Systems and Resources. In 2022, she was awarded the honorary membership of serving the Library and Information Association of South Africa, the IASA, as president from 2018 and 2021. On behalf of the IASA, she has made a number of submissions on the Copyright Amendment Bill and presented them in the online public hearings in August 2021. Most important, she was the project lead in the recovery program for the fire at the UCT libraries. Next is Ms. Denise Nicholson, who served for 38 years at Wits University in South Africa, including 24 years as the Copyright Scholarly Communication Librarian. I can hardly find someone in Africa and beyond who has not worked with or heard about or shared resources from Denise Nicholson. On a personal level, she's the person I started working with back in 2003, and so it's been 20 years of working with Denise. But Denise has been involved in a lot of activities around copyright and access to information. She's an advocate for copyright reforms across the continent, certainly here in South Africa. And since her retirement, she runs a small but impactful private consulting firm, Scholarly Horizons, which is co-organizing these events this week. Doug, again, apologies for overseeing, is director of Wikimedia. He has worked to make South African copyright law friendlier to the freedom knowledge movement. He has been a Wikipedia editor since 2006. He's also a criminologist studying the statistics and social context of violent crime in urban South Africa. So he's a man who wears many hats. Miss Mymoena Londt, I hope I got that right, has honors in library science from the University of Western Cape and a master's degree in information technology from the University of Pretoria. She works as the controller for the Reference and Information Services at the Parliamentary Information Center of South Africa, based in CapeTown. This is a specialized legal deposit library and information science service which meets the needs and requirements of members of parliament, ministers, and parliamentary staff. So we are honored to have someone from Parliament where obviously the South African Amendment Bill is still lagging. Finally, but not least, is Mr. Mduduzi Maseko, who is a Rupert Arts Foundation academic intern at the University of Wits University, Rock and Art Research Institute, where he's working closely with the Digital Lab, which maintains African rock art digital archives. He holds a Master of Science degree in archaeology from the University of Wits University and has previously worked as a lecturer for archaeology and rock art at the University of South Africa. So that is the panel this morning. And as I mentioned, this is going to be an informal conversation where we will pose a series of questions to the panelists to share with us what they do in their respective organizations and to get a better understanding of how digital technology can help us preserve African cultural heritage. To get us started, I think it is only appropriate that we start with the basics. It's easy to talk about some of these terms, but not realize that not everyone may be well conversant with what they mean. So I've asked Ms. Mutanu from Kenya to start us off by explaining in simple, straightforward language, what does digitization mean? How are they approaching it? What are some of the challenges and opportunities that they have seen in the course of their work as they try to build digital collections of cultural resources in Kenya? Mutanu?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? If you see me looking at my phone, I promise I'm not on social media. I have my notes on my phone. So my name is Mutanu, as mentioned, and I come from Kenya. I work from an organization called African Digital Heritage. So what we do is we say that we work at the intersection of culture and technology, which if you look at the background of these two structures, let me call them that, they're very different based off even their histories and how they have been structured in itself. I've been asked to start with the basics and answer maybe let's start with what digitization is. But I think even the problem is in the definition itself, because when we hear about digitization, we think about huge cameras and a lot of money, huge budgets. But from my understanding on how we have been able to interact with practitioners in the field is that it can be as simple as an 18-year-old sitting with a grandma and being told stories about their cultures, right? And then they put it on YouTube. And it can be as complex as a museum doing a 3D simulation of one of their collections. So depending on what cultural asset you have and how much money you have, then digitization is really the space for everyone. But I will try to define it as it's the intangible visualization of our physical world. In that it exists here, but it also exists in another world where you cannot touch it, yeah? So again, one of the reasons that people ask is then why are you digitizing? If it exists here and you want it to exist in another world, then why are you digitizing? One of the many reasons as when we look at the topic is we say to promote, to protect, and to conserve culture and cultural heritage. But so if we look at, for example, the files in the library, if the assets that they had been digitized, then maybe they will still exist because people will still be able to interact with them, right? But one of the other reasons that people digitize is that they want to interact with their audiences. But before we get to audience interaction, I think when we look at the field of cultural heritage, when you look at its history and its structure, as I mentioned in the beginning, especially in Africa, you'll realize that it was built on a legacy of exclusion, right? Where museums and libraries were built for people who looked a certain type and had access to these spaces, and they were not really for the indigenous communities. And I don't think when they were being built then, they were being built for interaction really, but it was mainly for observatory purposes, especially museums. But here we are as the global South, Africa in this context, and we've gained independence, and we have inherited the same systems, the same structures, and we're expected to work in the same spaces. But the thing I like about digitization is that it allows us to reevaluate the systems and to also to ask questions. And in its space also, we are allowed to add our voice to it. It's not just, this is a god from southern Kenya. But then we are allowed to say, this is a god from XYZ community in southern Kenya, and it was used for this. And for example, when a museum then digitizes this god or puts it on social media, people can come and interact on the comments and say, share pictures, we have this in our home, or my grandmother uses it for this. Then it becomes interactive with the audience, really. So, so how do you go about digitization? One of the many, so when I was preparing, I wanted to highlight 3 major points. So one of the many purposes of going around, one of the many ways of going about digitization that I think every practitioner should think about is then how do you make the originals connect with the digital in a meaningful way? Here, in a meaningful way, I'd like to also highlight that it's important that the same systemic injustices that were set up, that were put up in, like, let's say, putting out this, bringing together the collections that you have, should not be replicated to the digital. And then the other one will be that it is very important for people to understand the context within which they're digitizing. You're not just digitizing because everyone is digitizing or it is the cool thing to do. So one of the things that our practitioners think about when it comes to digitizing is then you will have to map your audience. Here context means you will map your audience, but you'll also map your resources. Mapping your audiences in Africa is actually really interesting because in as much as you're saying, okay, we are going digital, but who is our audience and where are they and how can we reach them? Because unfortunately we live in a part of the world where internet access is not that accessible. So now even if we are digitizing, let's say we are digitizing for a local community, on what platforms do they interact with, even messaging, and how do you get there? It'll be important for that. And something else that you might need to consider will be language. Yes, English is the lingua franca of the internet, but how do you also include local contexts to whatever it is that you're digitizing? Something else that I like to mention when we're giving organizations pointers on what to do about digitization is to think of the after. I'll give an example. Digitization hasn't started just the other day. Think about floppy disks and the magnetic tips, right? But in the 90s, there was this huge project that was done in the Kenya National Archives, where a lot was digitized on magnetic tips. But unfortunately, no one thought to think about the after. So here we are, the project is done. When you go to the archives, you will see piles and piles of magnetic tips, but no one can read the magnetic tips. So you have this information that is stuck there. I know practitioners like me are thinking of where do I get how can we get machines to be able to transfer this data from its original source to now an accessible source. So even when you're doing when you're doing your program plan, and your budgeting, it's important to not just do it for now, but also think about maintenance and upgrades. I was also told to talk about some of the challenges that we face. I think I have highlighted a few, but in the context of this conference, let's talk about copyright issues. Again, as I had mentioned, the field is really, really weird because in Africa, how we interact with culture and heritage and histories is that it's very communal based. But when you look about copyright, it's very individualistic and capitalistic. So practitioners are wondering then where do you draw the line? And also one of the many things that you're looking around is then how do you work around indigenous-based systems so that even communities can hold copyrights to digitization projects. Another thing that has come up in the things that you're doing is access, where it is public knowledge, but in the case of Kenya, if we look at our histories, we do not hold part of our archives. In terms, in the play of the politics of memory, some archives were destroyed and others were taken back to the UK, and we don't have them. So access to that has been very hard, especially if you're looking for like a photo and you can only find two. And one of the two has a huge watermark behind it. So it's very hard to work around that. Another thing that we have experienced is collaborative projects where the issues of copyright are not, people don't talk about the issues of copyright at the very beginning during the planning stage. And then the issues of copyright come afterwards. So 5 years after the project has been done, people are asking, so who owns the copyright? Who do we attribute it to? And sometimes you look at the contract and you find that because again, digitization, if done on big scale, requires a lot of money, that most of the copyright has gone to the financier of the project, which then just duplicates these systemic barriers that we really wanted digitization to break down. Yeah, and apart from that, it's just the lack of skills in the sector, where not many people, yes, tech is big and also culture is big, but not many people are working at the intersection of this. So it has been an interesting time to train people, but it has also been hard to try and convince these institutions on why they will need people in their team who are experts in the field and not just consultants who come in and leave after the project. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that excellent overview and basics, because I think it's very important that everyone has a good understanding and grounding in what digitization means and why it's important to the conversation today. So I shouldn't have mentioned that we have 5 minutes for the initial interventions, so let's try to keep it to that, but we shall have additional time later on in the session. Since we're at UCT, I think it is only appropriate that we hear about events that happened here in the library. So what exactly happened again in terms of the fires, and how could digitization help this collection? So, of course, Nikki is not here. Denise has graciously accepted to speak on her behalf. But I'm also aware that we have a number of folks from UCT libraries who may want to fill in the gaps. I see my friends at the back. So please, anyone can help Denise. So yeah, please. Microphone, please.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, our current Copyright Act of 1978 predates the internet by 5 years. So we are not allowed to digitize. We are not allowed to convert from old to new technologies or format shift or do anything digital without authorization. Digitisation needs permission before anything can be done. Some publishers grant permission with a fee, some don't charge, and some decline permission. The latter is really problematic, as this results in some works being digitised and others not being digitised and leaving gaps in the collection. Some will charge up to £3,000, British pounds, to allow us to put one article, an old article, onto an institutional repository on an open access platform. So in the case of the UCT Jagger reading room, they had already digitized many collections, fortunately, and because of our restrictive copyright laws, they couldn't obviously do everything or everything that's very important. But sadly, on the 18th of April 2021, a terrible fire spread down from the Rhodes Memorial behind UCT and spread rapidly through the library, destroying the Jagger reading room, an internationally renowned study room. Is it possible? You will see on the stats on the slides. These are the numbers of the items that were ruined. The entire African studies collection was ruined. But not just that. 3,500 African films and DVD collection were destroyed, government publications, also individuals who had given their collections to the library to look after. I know of one judge who put all his personal cases and archives there. They were all destroyed. So there was, and then of course, apart from all the losses and the damage, there was not just fire damage, but also water damage, because the fire, people had to just put the fire out, and of course more was destroyed by water. And then there was a whole exercise to try, as I understand, to refrigerate, to sort of ice up so that more damage wasn't done to the items that were saved. And then, of course, if you don't deal with that, you deal with mold and other problems. So there's not just the fire, but there's other problems that come with it. It's also not realistic to expect UCT to have digitized everything, because the digitization of heritage material in libraries, archives and museums is a complex and very costly process. The Copyright Act also has been a barrier to the digitization process. Now, had the bill that we have now been in place for some years and allowed libraries to digitize, possibly a lot of the losses would have been mitigated. So that's just a brief overview. I think I've covered what I can at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Denise. Obviously, the numbers are staggering to think about the scale of materials lost. Once again, digital technology could have helped us. The legal environment or framework could have helped. But that gives you an idea of just how much we can do if we are able to transfer these resources from one medium to another for posterity. So, Ms. Mymoena from the National Parliament here in Cape Town works in legal deposit. Can you briefly explain to us what legal deposit is or means, and how it can help us as a society to preserve cultural resources, and you specifically in the National Parliament, how you are going about digitization, if at all. And of course, not to put you on the spot, but of course, this is where the bill is currently being discussed. How can your library, proximity to parliamentarians, help demonstrate the importance of this bill and the key exceptions in the bill?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. It's green. Thank you so much for the introduction. So the Library of Parliament, basically, the South African Legal Deposit Act states that all publishers in South Africa must deposit a free copy of anything that is published within the country. This is to ensure that we collect, preserve, and make available to present and future users documents that contain the intellectual and cultural heritage of the country. At present, the Library of Parliament, as well as the National Library of South Africa in Cape Town and Pretoria, the Adelaide Tambo Public Library, the Mduduzi Municipal Library, and the Constitutional Court Library in South Africa all form part of the legal deposit libraries. And similar to the young lady on my right, I'm watching my screen because I've got some notes. Essentially, our role is to evaluate the resources that we get via the Legal Deposit Act. We don't necessarily, based on our collection development policy, accept all the items that are provided to the library. And the reason for this is our core business is to support the work that Parliament does. As Honourable Hermans indicated earlier, the core business of Parliament is to ensure that we pass legislation, that we scrutinise and oversight the executive of the country, that we facilitate public participation, just to mention a few. So any of the resources that we get that is donated to us, we don't always absorb this into our collection. Anything that we don't accept into our collection and historically disadvantaged school or institution requests for a donation, we then vet the process and we donate it to these libraries. I have to mention who our clients are. Our clients are members of Parliament, researchers, staff at Parliament, political party staff, and academics, research institutions, as well as legislators in the country. So these all feed into how it is that we build our collection. And this leads to, again, the Legal Deposit Act. Just because somebody's written a cookbook or garden book, if it doesn't apply to what it is that we're wanting to preserve in terms of our core business, we would then donate it to another institution. At present, our collection is comprised of a lot of documents that is in the public domain. And why I say it's in the public domain, we have legislative acts, we've got the tabled papers such as your announcements, tablings, committee reports, Hansards, internal question papers. These are all information that is in the public domain. And the Library of Parliament also, however, has items that are of historic value. We have the Sydney Mendelssohn collection, we have the William Jardine collection, and we have the Anglo-Boer War collections. Now, these are obviously of great historic importance. So this actually feeds into what the copyright law allows and does not allow. In our collection also, we are guided by our collection development policy, so we procure, based on public funds, books, etc., journals, that is again aligned to the core business of Parliament. So how do these exceptions in the copyright law affect the Library of Parliament? If, for example, one of the books that we have is damaged and or it's fragile, because of the copyright law, we cannot actually digitize it. We then need to seek the initial originator or author or person who's invented this information and request permission. With Parliament, because a lot of the things that we have in our collection resides within our collection and is our intellectual property, we're not affected by the copyright law in that way. But it does affect us when we want to, for posterity, secure and preserve materials for future collections. The copyright law is extremely prohibitive. It is therefore important that, one, we look at the copyright law to make sure that we try and digitize what is important for our cultural and intellectual heritage of the country. And secondly, that we not only, the one is to create the digitization, but you also need to have the access. At present, the Library of Parliament is implementing an institutional repository. So the public domain will be able to access our Hansards, etc., in a searchable, viable way on that platform. At the moment, we're not there yet. We've benchmarked with other institutions to see what's the best way forward. And then, what other challenges do we have besides the fact that we need to request permission? There are gaps in our collections. For example, sometimes we'll receive items or a copy will be missing. We've often liaised with people from UCT, librarians from UCT or around the world, where they'll say, oh, I saw you had this, but we've lost it, or because of the copyright laws, we couldn't digitize it, and this actually influences how we are able to provide the information that we need to our users, our clients. And also the fact that the copyright law doesn't make allowances, as Denise said, for the migration to different formats. And that actually affects, because I forgot your name, Mutanu, sorry. When she said the floppy disk thing, I remember when I wrote my one assignment on a floppy disk and it wouldn't work. And imagine that. My kid today will say, what is a floppy disk? So imagine in 100 years' time, somebody's going to say, wow, you use that thing? Where is it now? I can't access it. And the importance of the Library of Parliament is, in our collection, we have items dating back to the 1800s, to the 1600s. That information is very important that we keep it, because it has the historic value of what our country has gone through. And if this amendment bill doesn't get passed, basically, we'll have people in 100 years' time asking, oh, we didn't know what happened because the floppy disk didn't work. So, essentially, what would it be ideal? Parliament would be happy if we could digitize everything, but that's not going to work, because as Mutanu said, there's a lot of institutions that make a lot of money out of what is being published. But we would like the new law to make amendments so that we can digitize, to preserve the cultural and intellectual heritage of our country for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mymoena. Doug, Wikipedia is probably one of the biggest resources most of us use and go to for information. It's the closest you can come to the global library. Obviously, contributions come from ordinary citizens, and therefore is a great opportunity for ordinary people to document and contribute to this global library. So help us understand, as an editor, what happens when people contribute to Wikipedia, what does it take to add to this collection, and in so doing, help us to understand how the legal issues that we are talking about can impede ordinary people from making contribution to this collection.
Thanks, Dick. So can I just stand over there so our friends in Zoom can see us? Oh, sorry. So as Dick very correctly pointed out, Wikipedia is edited by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of unpaid volunteer editors. Any of you can become a Wikipedia editor. I strongly encourage it. We need more editors. On that note, most of the content on Wikipedia that you see that is digitized, such as multimedia like images, videos, sound recordings, etc., that generally goes to a sister project of Wikipedia called Wikimedia Commons. And that's integrated into Wikipedia. So all those images live on Commons. Now, Commons will only accept images with one of three Creative Commons copyright licenses or tools. You know, CC0, which is more of a tool than a license, CC BY and CC BY SA. Any of the other Creative Commons licenses which clarify the copyright under which this content has been donated or uploaded to Wikipedia cannot be accepted. The Wikipedia community takes the strictest possible interpretation of copyright law to protect the copyrights of the original author. We're very serious about that. But we also really, really, really want to illustrate our Wikipedia articles to make them as useful for the general public as possible. So generally what happens is content will only get uploaded if the person who's doing the uploading isn't the original author, and so making this donation to the public good, to the commons, the digital commons. Then what we'll generally do is we'll wait until the copyright has expired. So, you know, in America, it's 70 years plus life of the author. South Africa, 50 years plus life of the author. It differs from country to country. I think Japan is 100 years plus life of the author. They're pretty strict there. This prejudices recent content from the recent past. So you'll notice that sort of content from, say, the 90s or the 60s or the 70s, that's often quite hard to come by unless, you know, a Wikipedia editor has come across something they themselves created and it's donated. In terms of older content and collections from libraries, archives, galleries, and museums. The Wiki community, we do have a series of projects and programs to encourage the digitization of collections onto the digital commons. We've got commons, we've got loads of space there. We really, really want historic content from these collections onto the commons. We can obviously only accept them if they meet the strict copyright criteria that we have, right? Like ideally, they're going to be copyright expired, so there's no existing copyright on them. The big challenge we have there, though, is that a lot of institutions data hug, so they've got collections, but they're not donating them. They're resistant to the idea of donating them to the digital commons for posterity. And we're very happy to take anything anyone's got. I really want to encourage GLAM institutions to make a donation or reach out to us. Even if you don't have the money, I mean, I'm happy to go out and find the money. The Wiki community is very interested in encouraging the digitization, especially of cultural heritage, onto the digital commons, so that the whole world can share in that, and so that they can be used to illustrate Wikipedia articles. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So finally, we have Mr. Mduduzi, who comes to us from the Rock Art Research Institute. When we were working on the program for this session, my good friend Teresa Hackett reached out to me and asked me, what is rock art? Do you know what rock art is? And I said, yes. She thought that rock art is basically a collection of rock music. So in the interest of those who may not know what rock art is, please, would you start off by explaining what rock art is, what you do at this institute, and how and why it is important to the preservation of African cultural heritage?
Thank you for that question. I think Mutanu has explained a lot of what I was going to say, especially with regards to that last question. So I won't say much about that, what preservation is or what digitization is. Yeah, I think you've said a lot. But obviously rock art is a form of heritage in itself. So I'll just start with that question. What is rock art? It's not rock music, seriously. So rock art is a form of archaeological data, a form of archaeological knowledge, historical knowledge. For the people in South Africa or from Southern Africa, you know it in your banknotes, actually. If anyone has a banknote, if you pull it out, the images on your banknote of so-called hunting scenes, it's used in popular media. Our National Coat of Arms has a rock art image in it. Actually, we, as the Rock Art Research Institute, were involved in that, as well as the clay words in the bottom of the coat of arms. We were involved with that as well. So that's what we do as an institute. We are dedicated to the preservation of African heritage in the form of rock art, specifically. So the reason I'm here today, I'm representing one initiative of our institute, which is the African Rock Art Digital Archive. For everyone in the audience, if you have a device in front of you, if you could please go to www.sarada.co.za. That's www.sarada.co.za. So you could have a better idea of what I'm talking about as we go through the session. So yeah, basically, it's rock art is these images that indigenous communities made on rock surfaces. In Europe, it's not unique to Africa or South Africa or Southern Africa. In Europe, they call it cave art. In North America, they call them petroglyphs. And that's because of the technique in which it was made. In Africa, we have all kinds of rock art. We have paintings, we have so-called petroglyphs, incisions, engravings. So that's what we do as an institute. We go out into the field and find these images. We record them using photography and other archaeological documentation methods. Now, what brings us into this conversation is that this archive that we have, sarada.co.za, it contains a lot of collections, which a lot of it is data that was collected by us in the field as a team of archaeologists mostly. But some of it comes from other institutions in other parts of Africa. So we do not own those images there or those historical collections. And that's where the copyright issue comes in, which actually for us has not yet been an issue, but we are currently in the process of redrafting our contracts. So we want to understand better how these policies will affect us, or how it will affect the institutions or the individuals that whose collections we store in our database. Yeah, I think I'll just stop there for now. Thank you.
So much to our panelists. I think there's much to work with. As you can see, they work with different artifacts. They serve different communities. They work in different contexts, all of which comes together to present a variety of challenges when it comes to the legal issues that we are interested in here. Of course, there are other issues, technological skills, tools. We are not going to spend a lot of time exploring those. So I want to bring in the audience. If you have questions or comments, clarifications on anything that our panelists have said, this is a good time to do so. Any questions? Yes. All right. I'll keep this mic here. And to the lawyers in the room, I think it will be useful to try to distill some of the legal issues and that have sort of emerged from this conversation. How can we address these issues from a legal standpoint? How can we help these institutions function efficiently without the legal barriers that we've had them sort of allude to? So please, where's the first question? Please, remember to introduce yourself, then ask your question. We will take about 3 or 4, then have the panel address those and come back for more. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Professor Darlene Miller from the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. It's a long name. So sorry to derail the discussion a little bit. I know you're trying to focus on digitization, but I just wondered to Mr. Maseko, the Rock Art Research Institute, could you perhaps tell me more about what you have found and collated and digitized that relates to Khoi, indigenous Khoi rock art? If you have anything, thank you.
Okay, let's take about 3, then come back to the panel. Next.
Can you hear me? Yes. So I'm Giovanna Fontanella. I am part of the Culture and Heritage team at the Wikimedia Foundation. And I have a global, role, but previously I worked for the user group in Brazil. Oh, sorry. Thank you. And I am based in Brazil as well. I'm a Brazilian. And of course that I was involved in some of the projects that happened on Wikipedia around the fire in the National Museum of Brazil. And so this topic is right like in the center of my heart and my attention, and it's very important to me. So I was wondering, Denise, if you could maybe talk a little bit more on how the library has been doing since the fire, and how are the collections right now? What is the work that has been doing since everything happened? And I was wondering if you could also tell us more a little bit of well, like what is needed to make even more progress, if that's like something that they have been thinking about. Yeah. Thank you.
Let's go to Alan, then the lady in the back.
Hello, good morning. My name is Alan. I'm a professor at the Federal University of Rio. I'm from Brazil. And as you know, we had a fire too. We destroyed a huge collection of cultural artifacts and so on. And unfortunately in Brazil, where the president was basically a pre-human being, and therefore there was no concern of what to do with considering human heritage. So he's very pre-human in all senses. So I was wondering here in South Africa if the politicians, the parliamentaries, the judges react somehow to this, considering all the losses that you had here are also part of cultural heritage. And that's a very important issue. And cultural heritage is part of cultural identity, cultural rights, and so on. Has anyone taken a step forward in that sense? In Brazil, it didn't happen any of that because, well, as you know. But now it's all, everyone's like, well, now we need to do something about it. Nothing moved on so far in terms of the legislative, but now there are proposals to actually make that a very clear right in the Copyright Act. I wonder in South Africa if that happened at all. And the second question goes for the rock art project. I wonder if who has the copyright over the photographs or the digitalization of it? How is that made available if it's not? And how is that related to cultural preservation in that sense, cultural identity, and so on? So those are the two questions.
All right, let's take this one, then have the panel respond, and then come back for more questions.
Well, thank you so much, Dick. My name is John Asen from Nigeria. You know how you say that an image is worth more than 1,000 words? I mean, just looking at the slide about the fire, and I checked online, and I just couldn't believe the amount of damage and the loss. And I think that I read an article just immediately online, and it says Africa has lost a huge resource. So it's not South Africa that lost, it's not your city. It's humanity has lost so much. And it got me thinking, there will always be catastrophes that you can't begin to anticipate in any copyright law. So it might just be that we need to always have an overriding reserve provision. I mean, it's like a safety valve. So that in the event that you come to that point, you may not need it. I mean, just like when you're flying, they tell you about, the vest you may never want to wear, but just in case you need it. And I think that's probably one thing that we need to address. And in Nigeria, we have a section in the new bill that everyone seems to be having, well, not everyone. Some people just keep pushing back on. And it's a very simple section that says you could grant compulsory license in overriding public interest. And people think it's something that will be used casually. I say, no. There might just be a situation like this. For instance, in Nigeria, the National Library says they want to digitize the collection. And they've been back and forth on how to clear the rights. And we've not been able to give them, as the Copyright Office, a blanket license to just go ahead and do it because of the law. And the question is, suppose there's a fire tomorrow and that library goes out of existence. Who will be blamed for that? I mean, this is probably a case where I could take the risk and say, go ahead and digitize. Because in that case, government will be responsible if anyone brings up an issue. I mean, it's just too important to leave to the whims and caprice of some individuals who may feel that their works should not be digitized. So I think it might just be to have such a release valve in case of such unanticipated catastrophe. Like the COVID pandemic was never envisaged. So there was no way copyright could have had a solution or an answer to it. We can't just leave the future of humanity to a narrowly defined system. I don't think that was why the copyright law was put in place in the first place.
Thank you very much. And I guess you could say, coming from copyright regulator, that is probably a good blanket solution to what we are talking about. And for those of us who are practitioners, these are exactly the kind of exceptions we've been talking about to help this institution be able to do this kind of work, whether it is anticipatory preservation that can help, in good times, capture these resources so that when, in the event of such catastrophes, we have something, we have a fallback position. So let me give the panel an opportunity to respond to the questions. Maybe we take about 10, 15 minutes. I don't know how we are doing on time. Sorry?
Excuse me, my hand was recognized.
Oh, okay. One more. Then we can have the panel respond. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Figile Vilagazi. I'm from the University of the Western Cape. I also speak as a traditional healer. And my question is really relating to the content on YouTube. I was very, very relieved to hear Mutanu speaking about that from, just how we digitize. And I'm speaking directly from the experiences of what we call traditional healers in South Africa, which is izangoma, and the whole issue of cultural heritage that comes with that, because you would know that during colonization, we have people that were burnt in the country, and I'm speaking about fire here and how we preserve, in the name of being called witches, right? Our grandmothers, our great-grandparents, and so on. And then, of course, in indigenous systems, what we have as archives are the bodies of our elders. And how do you then digitize that in this era? What we have been doing as part of healer organizations that I also belong to, because I speak also from Equelo Healers Collective, we have been then, going to YouTube, like you are saying, Mutanu. But I think the questions then of copyright arise there to say, from the body of an elder or isangoma or a knowledge holder, right, to that space that we call digital. What are the copyright issues there? And my question then is perhaps what has been the experience in that regard? And I know one professor, for example, that is doing this work from the University of Botswana, who has been following archives that were taken from Africa during colonization. And that work is also, I think she is based in Kenya, in fact, but is originally from Botswana, touching on these issues to say, how do we even go to become more complex? Because when the witches were burnt during colonization, what has happened is that it's just the bodies that were burnt, but the knowledge that actually came from the bodies of our great-grandparents was then written into books. And some of these books are sitting in archives, what you call African studies, in various countries, in Europe, in the US, and so on. And I think this then speaks to also that question, right, to say, how do we, in the context of this advocacy around copyright law, ensure that those are preserved? And I'm speaking in the context of fire as well, because when you burn bodies that are archived, that are archives in the in the form of our great grandparents, then you actually are burning knowledge, and of course issues of preservation come in there. So it will be interesting to hear from the panel what are your experiences in that and the learnings as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the excellent questions. I'm going to give the panel time to respond. I know there are a few questions online. Please hold on to those. We are going to get back to those in a few minutes. Please, who wants to go first?
I can talk about UCT. as I was just told this morning that I was going to do this, I haven't got too much knowledge about what is going on, but I will give you some idea. I'm just looking at an article 1 year later after the fire. And just to show that this sort of process is going to go on for a long time. But one of the good things about UCT is that they did have a disaster management plan. And when the fire started, they managed to close off sections, so they saved a lot of other sections that could have been damaged. Also, as I mentioned earlier, they also had water damage. Some of the, were quite badly damaged because of that. They said about 13,000 crates of material extracted. Much of that went into remedial conservation, which meant it was sprayed with an antifungal solution, clean wrapped and put into deep freeze. So that was to avoid, obviously, mold and other problems. There are some people, I don't know if Ingrid would be able to advise what the state of the library is at the moment, but there's an ongoing project. They've had a team working very well. The whole process from when the fire started, they had excellent teamwork, and also communities and funders came to the rescue and helped them with all sorts of information and with equipment to help them in the process. But being such a large collection destroyed, obviously the ones that were saved have to be saved by restoring them. And so it's going to be a long-term project, but they have got a very positive process and outlook that they will, do their best to get this collection back up as best they can. But I don't know if, are you able to say anything about your library at this stage?
Yeah, so not sorry to put Ingrid on the spot, but
No.
she's not directly involved.
Well, anybody else at
but
UCT?
whatever you know, you can share with us, please.
You are indeed putting me on the spot. I don't really know very much, but there is work going on at the moment. I mean, the reconstituting of the collections, and I'm sure some of my colleagues are probably online watching this. So please look for the comments on the on Zoom, because that'll probably correct that. I mean, things are still being gone through, boxes unpacked, crates unpacked. Sort of the salvage operations and the reconstitution is happening. I mean, that day of the fire, I think there'd been a photoshopped picture earlier on in the day. And when someone sent me the picture of the Jagger Library with the flames coming out, I thought, oh wow, good job with the Photoshop. But it actually wasn't. It was real. I don't have much to add, but I'm sure that colleagues watching, that are online, will make some comments. So I think maybe there'll be some comments on the chat.
Thank you for your contribution, and
Thank you.
apologize for you putting me on the spot.
All right, next question.
I'll start with the first question from the lady in the back. Professor Miller. So as I was explaining earlier, the archive that I was talking about was built for the purpose of preserving this cultural knowledge, specifically Khoisan heritage, because a lot of the rock art that we have in Southern Africa was made by the people that we now call the Khoisan, so their ancestors, really. So it's the archive is I think right now over 5,000 images of those rock art sites, which are archaeological sites. Obviously, as archaeological sites, they don't just contain the rock art images, but they contain other kinds of archaeological data, which I don't really have to speak about here. But yeah, that's what our focus is on. I think it's actually appropriate that we're having this conversation here in Cape Town, where the first colonial encounters occurred, and as many of us would know, where the Khoisan people were hunted, killed, and a lot of battles happened and genocide happened. So in a way, that's what we're trying to encounter is a decolonial approach to responding to that. And actually, one of the resources that we rely on was housed here at UCT, the Black and Londt archive. I was going to ask Denise or anyone from UCT about how that digitization process worked and how that was saved, thankfully. But that's what we rely on, basically, the ethnography. So the stories of elders that were told by prisoners at Breakwater a couple of 100 years ago. So that's our main source, and that's what helps us to interpret these images to say these aren't just so-called hunting scenes, which was the colonial approach or colonial interpretation, but these are actually archives of what these people believed in, how they lived, but mostly their traditions, their customs, their ritual beliefs. So we use this shamanistic model, which is also applied in other parts of the continent, other parts of the world, which really delves into why this rock art heritage is important, because it's not just, oh, these people were here and they made these drawings. It's really what their beliefs were and how that connects to the remaining Khoisan communities that we still have in the country who aren't even recognized. Their languages are not recognized as a people. They're not really recognized. So we just had an exhibition at the Origins Museum at Wits University, which is just downstairs from our institute, where we have this touch screen where people can come and interact and look at the specific image that was used in the coat of arms, like the nuances in it. It's not just the two people holding hands. That was actually even not the original image. But just so you look at that screen and you click and it tells you this is what this symbol means here, this is what this symbol means. And it's just a way of educating the public on why this is important and exactly why we do the work that we do. Thank you. And the second question, who has the copyright to the images? Well, that's a complication, really, because as a national heritage, no one owns heritage, right? No one has ownership of a heritage site or an archaeological site. It's state property in a way. So that's where the issue is. But because it's rock art and it's digitized, people take photographs. For us as researchers, we aren't really interested in owning those images. Because we use them mainly for research. But some of these collections were made in the 1800s and the 1900s. So there are certain individuals that have copies of certain images that people cannot access now, either because those sites were destroyed or they cannot be accessed anymore. And so some of those individuals who come to the Institute and donate those collections, or they could say, can you please digitize these collections for us, and then we take them back. So we have these collaboration agreements. I actually have a copy with me here that stipulates that copyright ownership remains with whoever the owner of those materials is. And we just act as an agency for the institution, which is Wits University. So it's really a legal agreement between Wits University and whoever is asking for those collections to be digitized, or whoever actually owns them or is donating them. One of the issues with that is, say the person is now deceased, who does the copyright now fall to? Who will own the copyright to those images? Is it the institution? Should the rights be transferred to someone else in the family or whatnot? Or should it just be in the public domain? So that's a conversation in itself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to give priority first to folks online to make sure they are part of this conversation. So please, can you bring them in? Please, you are good to go.
Hello.
If you're online.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm Carolyn Hamilton. I'm the South African Research Chair in Archive and Public Culture. And I'd like to feed into the discussion a question relating to the institutional control over the national archival estate. So one of the most neglected areas of Southern African history is the period before colonialism. Now, the material that's capable of supporting research and public inquiry into that period is scattered and it's buried in institutions in this country and around the world more generally. Only by excavating it out of the institutions and contextualizing it and doing quite a lot to make it available does it open easily to contemporary research. So we, for example, run a project which tries to do that. We find the international institutions readily share the material with us. And one institution in particular in South Africa, the Corey Library at Rhodes University, are very willing to do this. A couple institutions in South Africa sitting on very old materials, which are very difficult to access and very difficult to use without all sorts of research infrastructure additions, which we're able to do on digitally. These institutions will not allow us to share those materials online. It's far from clear to me that they have the right to withhold that permission. And I've certainly had discussions with Tobias about this. Be very interested if the conference could hold these matters in their minds and discuss them. It seems to me a shocking situation when institutions stop serious scholarly efforts at making these materials available to researchers, and how shocking it is that this is stopped in relation to the Southern African past before colonialism, which remains so. I think we're sitting on a scandal here, and I'm ashamed of our institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions online? Okay, so let's come back to the room. I'm going to start with my director from Uganda.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dick, and thank you to our panelists. You're doing great. Good morning to you all. Well, allow me to refer to this as the digitization dilemma because of what is happening around and what we have to pay, the cost we have to pay for not digitizing. It's a dilemma. And it comes with a lot of challenges on the African continent, and especially the spaces that still have libraries, the academia, the learning spaces, and the issues that need to be addressed beyond the legal proposals and provisions is the cost of digitization and the matters that relate to space. I know there's a lot of space in the cloud, storage, the storage cost. We also have to either strike a balance between the cost, do a cost and benefit analysis between the benefit of digitization and what we lose from failing to digitize. We have seen the fires and the water effects on our protected works. And so we need to create environments that include, of course, fireproofing or waterproofing, among others. And maybe it is also time for us to evaluate the roles of and do a baseline on the libraries, because this has been undervalued the libraries, the use of libraries, especially the physical ones, has gone low. And beyond the legal security as well, we need to look at this possibility of cyber attacks. Yes, we are moving digital, but how prepared are we in terms of protecting ourselves from the cyber attacks? I agree with my colleague from Nigeria on the proposal of having inbuilt measures within the law that provide for the compulsory protection under some circumstances. I know we could do this at an administrative level, but it is better to have it in our laws, especially to protect the known works, the known authors, and also the orphan works as well. So in other words, we need to create a movement that advocates for digitization of the libraries, that addresses the cost, who is going to bear the cost of this digitization, and as well as the future-proofing that was mentioned in the opening remarks. This is about future-proofing and protecting of all the works, especially those that are collected in the physical libraries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mase. And of course, there are ongoing copyright reforms in Uganda. So this is a great opportunity probably to do this legislatively and make sure maybe Uganda can provide the best practice alongside Nigeria on how we can help culture institutions take advantage of the law to preserve cultural heritage. So we have, I think, about 2-3 questions. Let's take 2 more, then get back to the panel.
Thank you, Professor. Okay, mine is not a question, but just a comment on the ongoing conversation. One thing that caught me with what Mutanu said is that usually the copyright questions would arise after the process, is when people begin to ask, okay, so who owns this? So is this right or is this not? And I think that should be inverted. The questions should arise from the beginning so that whatever is being done in terms of digitization is being done within the boundaries of the law. But also speaking from this perspective of the people who draft the amendments and work on the laws every other day, I feel that these organizations should proactively engage with the policymakers and the people in charge of the laws so that you make sure that whatever you need to help you along with what you need to do is already provided for. One of the big challenges we have had, the ones who were there in the session in Pretoria had shared that we have done sort of piecemeal sort of amendments here and there, and some of them arise out of the requests and the need, yeah? And so one of the challenges we have had is that every time we have a proposed amendment and we share and we want to get comments from the relevant people, we don't. And so I will sit there as a lawyer, as an IP practitioner, as a theory person, and do what I know to do in theory. But you, the practicing person, the person who practically deals with that issue, you have not given me your comments, you have not given me your challenges, then I'm unable to provide for that in the law. So I'm going to deal with that when a court case arises or when an issue arises. And so for me, what I'm saying is that I'm encouraging that ROCAT, for example, whoever else, engage with the policymakers, engage with the people that deal with the law and say, this is what we need. How do we do this within the boundaries of the law? And as my friend, Dr. Sein put it, we put the safety guards already in the law so that we are not dealing with issues as they have arisen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, one of the main goals of this conference, certainly this session, was for bringing practitioners and policymakers together to hear some of the challenges they face. And already we are hearing from 3 major countries are providing what would be possible legal solutions. So this is very encouraging. We are definitely going to take you up on this. I think, yes, please.
I just forgot to say to Mutanu, we are now engaging on amending our act as a whole. Yeah, and so you need to engage us in good time to know what you need.
And we are definitely going to be in Nairobi, on National IP, International IP Day, April 26th. So as I mentioned, we are going to take you up on this. So I think there was a question there. Alan, if you don't mind, let me go give Prof here a chance, then we can come back to you since you've had the opportunity to.
Thank you. I'm Jonathan Band. I represent library associations in the United States, like the American Library Association. So we've been dealing with these preservation issues for a long time, and you know, and we have the same problems with libraries and archives that are suffering damage, fires, water damage, and then just the normal deterioration of media. This is not a uniquely African problem. I mean, this problem exists everywhere. One of the people before mentioned orphan works, and that's an issue I want to share a little experience with. So an orphan work is a work that's still under copyright, but you can't find or identify who the copyright owner is. And the reason why you have orphan works is because, as Doug mentioned, you know, copyright lasts a long time. It lasts the life of the author plus 50 years under the Berne Convention, but in many countries it's longer, like in the United States and in the European Union, it's the life of the author plus 70 years. In Mexico, it's the life of the author plus 100 years. So copyright lasts a long time. And also many works are created that were never intended to be commercialized. And so with works like that, it's really impossible to ever figure out who is the copyright owner. But even works that were commercialized or created with the intention of being commercialized over time, again, over the life plus 70 years, you know, companies go out of business, people die, their heirs don't even know that there's a copyright that in theory belongs to them. So you do have this problem of orphan works. Once digital technology first became available, a lot of the libraries and archives in the United States were very interested in digitizing, you know, their works, the works in their collections, but they were worried that again, you know, when you have, let's say, an archive of several 100,000 photographs from the 1940s, you have no idea who took those photographs, and you know, there was concern. Okay, how do we go about digitizing them? And so there was, for a while, the Copyright Office did a study, and there was a lot of discussion, and we decided we would try to come up with a legislative framework to specifically deal with orphan works. But ultimately, and that framework involved doing a reasonably diligent search for the copyright owner. But we very quickly realized that approach really didn't make sense. I mean, how can you do a reasonably diligent search for the owners of, you know, the hundreds of thousands of photographs you would have in an archive? I mean, it's an impossibility. But at the same time, there was a recognition that because those works really have such little commercial value, that you could probably just digitize them under our existing fair use statute. And initially there was reluctance among the libraries to rely on fair use. But then over time, as they started doing it, and they realized that fair use was a perfectly acceptable way of approaching these enormous collections that really, of works that either never had commercial value or certainly have no commercial value currently. And so libraries and archives in the United States have really been proceeding under a fair use analysis. I mean, they look at the body of works and they sort of say, well, really, is there anything here that has sort of current commercial value? And if it doesn't, they are comfortable digitizing them and often putting them online and making them available. So what I'm saying is my basic point is that rather than coming up with very specific legislation to address very specific preservation needs, it might be better, and it's certainly in our experience, it has been better to simply rely on a general fair use provision, because your specific needs are going to keep on changing. The technology is going to change, the problems are going to change, but the need to preserve isn't going to change. And so that's why, again, we've found that a general fair use provision is more effective than trying to work out a specific thing, let's say, for orphan works. Thank you.
Mine is actually a comment on the record and the documents that you're using for getting the copyright and being able to make it available. This is a great opportunity for law school professors to actually act and actually help the institutions that are actually doing this work. Because there's a simple way of doing so. You need to get the copyright for all picture takers except the ones that are not in the public domain, and hold the copyright and then make it available. That would be the solution. That's the solution, for example, we found in a couple of institutions in Brazil. We used the copyright law to create the contracts to obtain the copyright, and therefore it's ours, and then we can make it freely available. So that's the easiest path to do so. And I see a lot of legal colleagues, professors, and universities could actually act and help on that. And I'm pretty sure a lot of students would be very, very willing to do that help. So consider there are a lot of lawyers and law schools here. I think that's where we should step in and actually help.
Thank you. So just to follow up, Mdu, it's a right to research in Africa. One important component of decolonial research methodology is the co-production of knowledge. So if you are gathering artifacts, rock art from local communities and local indigenous communities, how is your methodology attending to that critical decolonial method?
All right, thank you very much. More comments than questions, lots of possible solutions to the problems that have been identified. Anyone wants to react?
Thanks, Dick. On the first question, the heritage / collection hugging issue that was raised, so I can't speak to you about sort of South Africa, but certainly the experience of the wiki community internationally has been that a lot of institutions practice this kind of heritage or collection hugging. I can't say why sort of they do this, why there's this institutional instinct. Broadly, I think it changes from institution to institution. I think part of it is, I know that for some museums and some art galleries, there's a fear that if they, and I can only answer this question from the point of view of sort of like, digitizing this content onto the digital commons for everyone to access it online freely. So the fear of many museums and other GLAM institutions is that if they digitize this content, they put it online for everyone to view, then they'll get less visitors to their institutions and so less revenue. Now, work done in the United Kingdom shows that the opposite is usually the case. In fact, I only know of instances where the opposite is the case, where when content in their collections is digitized and put online, people can see what the collections are on the internet, and then they're more likely to go to the institutions to see them in person. So actually what they see is visitor numbers actually go up when they're digitized. I do agree that this is actually a scandal for institutions to collection hug or culture heritage hug, if they're national institutions with an obligation to the public good to share this cultural heritage with the public. I think that is a scandal to, I agree that it is a scandal to sit on that and not share that with the public. when much of these collections contain works that are of such great value to the heritage of the nation, the world, even. On the other issue of cost of hosting and digitization, I remember you asked the question there. So I can't answer the question from the point of view of, say, individual libraries or institutions on a national level. I can only answer this question on a wiki level, right? So we've, as I mentioned before, we got Wikimedia Commons. We gladly accept all content for free. We host that on free. It gets backed up into a server farm in the United States. That's a bit controversial within the movement, because we want to see more server farms with other backups around the world. So there's a movement to do that within the wiki movement, and there are many reasons for that. One of those reasons is actually copyright related, actually, because copyright regulations differ in different parts of the world. And America's, in many ways, has got quite strict copyright rules, at least in terms of sharing works with the rest of the world. But yeah, it's there. It's free. I encourage individuals and institutions to at least consider uploading their collections to the digital commons and Wikimedia Commons. The only requirement is that it's essentially the copyright is donated to the world, to the digital commons, for everyone to use in one of three Creative Commons licenses. Orphan works, I know that also came up as well. We do actually have, so Wikimedia South Africa, we do actually have an experience on the issue of orphan works in South Africa. We've, at least on 2 occasions, we've had institutions actually come up to us, and they hold collections. The most recent one, the one I'm thinking of right now, is actually of an Afrikaans, encyclopedia. And they don't know who the owner of the Afrikaans encyclopedia is. This is a publication that was published in the 60s or 50s, thereabouts. So it sort of lies in that gray area so far as Wikipedia is concerned, as we don't yet know if the work has yet expired or not. But assuming, because we don't know who the author is, so we don't know what the date of death is. So assuming he died on the day that he published the work, very unreasonable assumption, maybe the copyright has expired. But we don't even know who the author is, we don't know who the owner is, and currently South African copyright law is very vague on the issue of orphan works. I'm sure Denise can tell us a bit more about that. But to the extent that we just can't accept them, right? Because we don't know what the copyright status is of orphan works in South Africa. We don't know what the law says about orphan works and accepting orphan works in South Africa is. So although we've got people who really want to digitize content onto Wikipedia and share it with the world, unfortunately we can't accept it.
Thank you. I give my speech in French. Is there anyone to translate? Okay. Alors merci. Moi, je m'appelle Abdou. Je voudrais en fait vous remercier d'abord pour votre contribution. C'est très intéressant. Et au Sénégal, nous disposons d'un potentiel documentaire très riche en termes de documents anciens. Et nous avons un problème en réalité, c'est comment exploiter ces documents. Il y a trop de théories, on fait des rencontres, on a organisé pas mal de rencontres pour discuter de la manière dont ce potentiel pourrait être exploité. Concrètement, qu'est-ce qui est en train de se faire ici en Afrique et comment les gens pourront aider les pays africains à exploiter ces documents. Pourquoi je parle de ces documents-là? Parce que on dit que l'information scientifique la plus pertinente pour un pays, c'est celle qui est développée par le pays, c'est-à-dire celle qui est produite par le pays. C'est-à-dire souvent, lorsqu'on fait des recherches, on cite des auteurs étrangers, dans n'importe quel domaine, on cite des gens d'ailleurs, alors que nous avons des érudits dans notre pays qui ont produit des choses qui datent de très longtemps et qui pourraient être, au même titre que les productions européennes et les productions récentes, être citées. Donc, je pense que l'exploitation de ces données-là permettrait d'avoir des connaissances qui pourront être citées dans les revues scientifiques. Donc, ce que je veux dire ici, c'est que nous prenons des références alors que nous avons des références dans notre pays que nous pourrons exploiter. La question maintenant, c'est de savoir comment on pourrait exploiter toutes ces données-là. You understand?
Yes, parfait. Ouais. All right, so we took notes. I hope this will reflect what you just said. So my name's Abdul, and thank you for the interesting contributions. So in Senegal, we have a large potential for documentation of all documents, but we have a problem in how to explore them. There are many theories to discuss the best way to use this potential concretely. What is being done here in Africa, and how can people help African countries to explore this potential, he asks. Why do I talk about these documents? Because it's said that the most useful information is the one produced by the country itself. We cite foreign authors in all areas, while we have people in our countries that for a long time could be at the same level of Europeans and could be cited. So I think that exploring this domain would allow us to have knowledge that will be cited across various scientific domains. And so here I make reference for us to use our own references. And the issue then is how to explore this potential. So he's asking for feedback on that particular issue. Thank you very much, Abdul.
I don't know whether any panelist wants to take that or anyone in the audience. And it could also be a question for the next panel, which is going to address some of these issues. So thank you very much for that question. We are almost out of time. I want to do one or two things. Give my colleague Teresa Hackett, a few minutes to make a few remarks. Then put our Member of Parliament on the spot to sort of wrap up and sort of give us a reaction on how the South African environment is going to respond to these questions, given all the examples that we've had from South Africa. So, please.
So thank you very much, Dick. And I wanted to just comment on a couple of salient points that came out during the course of the discussion. The first is that preservation is not a one-off event. So as we heard, preservation is an ongoing process that needs to be continued to migrate the content as the technology evolves and as the software platform evolves. Sometimes we hear from copyright experts or policymakers, well, you know, you've preserved the work, you've done it, it's now available, so, you know, you've done the job. But in fact, it's an ongoing iterative process. And sometimes we see in copyright laws that the law prescribes a certain number of copies, preservation copies that can be made. Sometimes it's 3 copies, for example. But in the digital environment, the process of digitization necessitates the making of multiple copies, these technical cache copies, and it's an ongoing process of digitization. So you should be allowed to make as many preservation copies as necessary in order to facilitate the preservation process. Then the other question that's very important is access, preservation and access. So there's really no point in preserving unless, there's no point in preserving if the preserved materials are not available to the researchers, to the scholars, and to the communities about for whom you are doing this digitization work. So in other words, we need an exception in the copyright law to the reproduction right and to the right of communication. Otherwise, we're creating these so-called dark archives that no one can access, and that's not a good use of anybody's time or resources. And then the third point is bringing preservation right back to the subject of this conference, the right to research. Preservation is essential to the right to research, because if the material doesn't exist, it can't be researched. And for a lot of material, this means that it must be professionally preserved and curated over time and made available by those institutions that have a mandate and a professional responsibility to do this work. So, so I think it's an important job not only for cultural heritage and humanity, but also contributing directly to the right to research. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those summary of key points. So please, if you could make a few closing remarks responding to some.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. As I said in my opening remarks, the copyright amendment is still in process in South Africa. It's been changed from a Section 75, which would have passed the legislation in the National Assembly, to Section 76 because of sections dealing with indigenous knowledge and traditional matters. So it is now in the National Council of Provinces, where we have a further intake of public participation on the proposed amendments. We know that the reservations of the President when he returned the amendment, the bill to Parliament, was mainly on constitutional matters because we wanted to pass constitutional muster. But what I've been asking myself here, sitting here as a legislator in Parliament, as a member of Parliament, whether, for instance, the libraries have made a submission to the NCOP or even the National Council of Provinces process, you know, on the problems, for instance, with digitization that you have mentioned. But I wish that the whole of Parliament was here to listen to this conversation. And maybe we need to, yeah, no, really, I mean, important, and I think it's what you're talking about here affects lives, not of all South Africans, everyone in the world. And I wish they could be here to listen. And maybe we need Ben to find a way to do that. And Prof. Tobias, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's no better way to close this session than getting the affirmation from a Member of Parliament of how important the practical issues we've had this morning to legislation. I can confirm that we have made submissions. I suspect sometimes they get lost in the sea of comments you get. And we will continue making submissions. Personally, I think we sent a lot of submissions. But this session is recorded, I believe, so we can make that available to Members of Parliament here and elsewhere in Africa to make sure that they get access to the issues that this community faces. Any quick reactions?
It's an ongoing process, but it also has to be interoperable with other systems in that as well. So you have to be sure that you've got a proper plan, a digitization plan, and not only preservation, but digital curation, an ongoing thing that works with, as technologies change, you can automatically move on, otherwise you'll lose stuff on the way. Another thing, just briefly, is that very often service providers do their digitization and they can do a very shoddy job, and in the process they lose material as well. We've seen some horrific projects where they cut off pages and they do it at angles and they actually ruin the information. So do make sure that you get good people to do the job when you do digitize, because otherwise you lose material from that point of view. Thank you, and thanks very much for your attendance and your presentation.
I just wanted to add on to what Denise was saying, that just to digitize is not enough. It's very important that when we digitize, we do it properly, and that the way that we do it, that there is a way for us to access the information. Because I think a lot of people focus on, oh, it's okay for me to scan this, and somebody will have access to it. But then if the quality is not that great, how are you going to make sure that it's available? And I wanted to make one other comment. and I'm saying this loosely. Okay. I wanted to say that I think Jonathan said it. When the members of parliament in our country meet to deliberate on the passing of any legislation, there is a process where we speak, you'll hear everyone say public participation, public participation. But the reason why we say this is because a lot of people in our country don't know that they have a right for their voices to be heard. And like Denise said, there are 3 versions of this bill, if I'm not mistaken. There have been more, but I think that it speaks to the severity of members of parliament actually deliberating on the profound impact of what this law will be. Because Jonathan said, if you're going to pass a law, no, it wasn't Jonathan, it was, I think, Dick. He said, if you're going to pass a law, it must be future-proofing to make sure that it makes general provision for whatever is about to come. And I think that's what the gentleman from the ALA said, is that when you make these laws, ensure that it makes provision for fair use and future use as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We were well over time, past time, so we will stop here, despite many more issues that we could talk about. I think it's fair to say that this has been a rich, informative and practical conversation. I've personally learned a great deal, and I'm happy to hear policymakers respond in a way they have in terms of inviting us to help provide them with the solutions, legislative solutions that can help our institutions. So we will end here, but I think it is fair to say that we've had an excellent panel, so please join me to thank the panel with a round of applause. At this point, I'll hand over to Ben. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Des. Thanks again. We will have to allow Judy Hermans to return to her duties after the tea break, but hopefully returning with armed with a lot of information and a to-do list when it comes to engagements with colleagues in Parliament, so thanks a lot. If we can try to keep the tea break just a little bit under 20 minutes, perhaps 15, 17 minutes, so we can come back. We do have Professor Glenda Gray, who is the President and CEO of the South African Medical Research Council, who is going to address us at the beginning of the next session with many other speakers, talking about health research and some very important case studies and examples from that sector. So we'll see you shortly.